So quick little background. If you've been to this track before, you would have gotten the IBM talk on OpenBMC from Chris Austin. Chris has moved on to other new and exciting things back home, so you get me instead, Brad Bishop. I've been involved with the project for as long as Chris, since the beginning, so hopefully I can talk to this stuff as well as he did. Okay, so the state of development. So you can ignore the title. I submitted my abstract for this talk, or when I submitted it, I thought I was going to be up here giving a tech talk about what's going on in the software, but that wasn't to be. Instead, I'm going to talk about from the angle of community, people, structure, that kind of thing, because there's been some exciting things happening on that front here lately. So a while back, someone from this group, I don't remember who, called a meeting, and the invitation kind of went like this. Hey, there's a lot of excitement around this OpenBMC concept, but I think we might be doing the community part wrong. So let's meet and talk about that. So representatives from this group had a meeting, and it kind of went like this. Everyone's really excited about this OpenBMC stuff, and people want to get involved, but the first thing that people coming in have to do is to figure out how to navigate this mess of all this code that's floating around and where to contribute to. And so we should fix that. Lots of head nods. Yep. Someone said, not to be Captain Obvious, but if we had a single project, would that help? Yeah. And if we all publicly, expressed our support for that single project going forward, would that help with this? Yeah. Let's do that. So that's not really what happened, but it sets the stage for what came next. There was a lot of, it took a really long time. And so the number of conversations, the goal being, the output of those conversations being the minimum framework that we could come up with. And when I say framework, I don't mean in the technical sense, but what's the minimum that we can specify to come up in terms of ownership, in terms of process, whatever, that we're all is a project that we can contribute to. Minimal, because there's more than just the companies listed there, and so any additional restriction or process that didn't need to be there was kept out to encourage the most participation as we could. So this is where we landed. Yeah, we have a consensus and a path to get to a unified community. I'm happy to announce. Now, and to be clear, it's a plan. We're not there yet. There's a lot of work to get to that unification. We've only done the first step, which is we all agree on how to get there. And that's going to take time. The canonical source code, you can see a URL there, should look familiar. Oops. We have and then I just have a list of things here that I'll go over more, but these are all typical things you'd expect to find in an open source project. We have a charter. OpenBMC is a Linux Foundation project starting Monday, last Monday, this Monday. We have a technical steering committee. We have work groups, maintainers, contributors. So the project charter, there's a, oh man, did I not? Insert link here, oops. www.openbmc.org, you can go find the charter there. So I didn't, should have had this proofread, oops. So link, openbmc.org, you can go out there and find the charter. The site went live Monday. It's lightweight, flexible, non-prescriptive. And again, the intent there was to, come up with process. Let's let the community come up with process and how we want to do things as we go forward, and not put things in there that are going to turn people off from day one. That said, the charter can be changed, and if you go out there and look and you find things that you don't like, bring those forward. We'll talk about it. Bring those to the mailing list. So some of the highlights of what's in there, the technical steering committee, voting mechanics outlined, Apache 2 for software licenses, Creative Commons for documentation. And then probably most controversially, there is contributors are required to execute a CLA to contribute. I didn't hear any groans, but I'm sure there were some in your head. The reality is a CLA does provide real value and protections for people wanting to use something like OpenBMC in their products. We have people that can help you understand the rationale, walk you through it. So if you have questions or concerns, again, bring them to the mailing list, and we'll get those people, we'll get you connected with them to help explain the value it brings. If after that you're still not convinced, again, just raise it as an issue. We can talk. We'll see what happens. Linux Foundation. So OpenBMC, it's now a Linux Foundation project. There's a lot of people using BMCs to solve a wide variety of problems in our industry, and so it's pretty natural that people coming to this project are going to be business competitors. So the Linux Foundation just made sense as a neutral steward to a project like that. So that was the motivation there. OpenBMC is heavily based on Yocto. The Yocto project is also a Linux Foundation project. And then just a couple bullets there on what it means to be owned by the Linux Foundation. They own any kind of trademarks and domain names, IANA numbers, et cetera. The Technical Steering Committee. So you got a list there of the members. I believe they're all in this room, probably. The TSC right now is working to define its role and identify new member criteria. But that said, there's one area where this group does have consensus in terms of that this entity, this body, should stay out of the way. So this is not an entity that's going to be actively saying, no, you can't do that, or this is what you should do. That's not the point. The community itself through code contributions, and other contributions drive the direction that the project goes in. And this body here has, they would all support me in what I'm telling you right now. So really their role is to provide resolution as a last resort. If in the community we can't have an open conversation, come up with some kind of a consensus, then the TSC can be there to make a call so that the project can continue to make forward progress and not get stuck on an issue. The goal, I would like to never see one of those issues come to the TSC, frankly. Hopefully we can work out our differences in the open in a collaborative way. Let the TSC members know how they're doing. I think a lot of them, I know, certainly myself, I is pretty new at this. So if you think the TSC should be doing one thing or the other, again, just bring that to the mailing list. Let us know how we're doing. I would love to hear that feedback. And then there's a super tiny link there to a working document of where that list is. It's in the docs repository. Okay, next level down, we have this concept of working groups. The idea is really pretty simple. It's a self-organizing group of people that want to work on the same thing. These things will probably be proposed and announced on the mailing list. So it's critical that you watch the mailing list to find out when these working groups are going to be formed, so that if it's something you're interested, you can get involved. Anybody can propose a working group. You can just say you think the test infrastructure of the project stinks, and you want to fix it. Go to the mailing list and propose, like, I'd like to start a working group. I'd like to lead a working group centered around how we do testing. Find interest and lead that group to do something in the open in the project. You don't have to be, working groups aren't appointed or anything like that. They need to form on their own. There aren't really any rules around working groups, just that the one thing we ask is that work group output is shared openly on the list, so that everyone else can see what happened there and offer feedback. Next, code maintainers. I think the concept of a maintainer is probably pretty well known. I mean, these are people with real power and authority in that they can prevent code from going in. That's the only thing they really can do is stop something. But we're up to, historically the project has only had like 1 or 2 maintainers across the entire code base. That's not going to work, obviously. So we've been moving towards having more maintainers. We're up to about 20, last count. That role, again, was typically all within IBM. That is moving outside of IBM. We're kind of, I have this case study here, IPMI stack maintenance. So the IPMI stack is co-maintained by individuals from 3 different companies, and we're kind of falling into a model of co-maintainership, because that it makes people feel better to know that there's not that unilateral maintainer model that some other projects have, and that even amongst the maintainers you have to have some degree of consensus before you go forward or not. And then at the bottom, but the most important role, are the contributors themselves. This is just a list of how you can contribute. Obviously code, some of these are pretty obvious. Testing, peer review, but some things that maybe aren't as obvious are project management. We don't have any right now. Any project management that's happening in the OpenBMC space is happening back behind company walls where OpenBMC is being used in products and projects at those companies. But there's certainly a need for community-focused project management to, so again, it's an area where you might not think of right away in terms of how to contribute, but and then we're up to about 90 code submissions from 90 individuals at last count, and I'm excited. I think that number is going to grow really soon here, based on what's happening here, Linux Foundation, et cetera. So getting involved, this is probably the most important slide here. This is a list of the forums that exist today where this is where the project is happening. This is where designs are being hashed out, decisions are being made. To be involved, you need to be participating in these forums. The email list is probably the most critical. If we're forming work groups on the mailing list, having design discussions, people are just talking about what they're going to work on. Something I get asked somewhat often is, hey, where can I go and find the list of what the project is going to work on in the next year? We don't have that yet, right? Well, someday, I hope that we have project management contributions in the community that could provide a list like that. But until we get there, you have to pull those things out of these forums. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to miss out. So yeah, very critical. Just bring your discussions, your questions, all that thing. Bring them to one of these forums, the list. There's a link there. We have a Monday call every week. It's really informal. You just come, maybe you just introduce yourself because it's the first time you've joined, or you bring questions, just listen to the conversation. There is a wiki page, didn't put a link here, but where anyone can go edit that and add topics for the agenda. The agenda's been pretty light, so please bring things to that forum. And then we have an IRC channel on Freenode. Again, lots of good conversation in there, and it would be wise to stay on top of it so that you know what's going on. Finally, another great forum for finding out what's going on in the project is actually looking at the code and doing reviews. And at the same time, you're contributing because you're doing some peer review. Okay, so 2 slides left. These are, got a couple of, just kind of a how-to on how to submit a patch. So the first bullet, this is not meant to be condescending or anything, but you got to know how to use Git. What I mean there is, as you go through the process for the first time, you're going to be asked to do things. Like, you may have 10 patches, and somebody will say, hey, can you go fix this thing in the middle? And a lot of times I'll hear feedback like that's cumbersome, that's a pain. And so as you go through the process, if you're being asked to do, like, Git is designed from the ground up for collaborative use cases like OpenBMC. And so if you're asked something and it sounds like it's hard, that it's probably identified, there's probably a Git workflow that will help you get through that. So it's really important to be able to use that tool pretty effectively. The next step would be to open a GitHub account if you don't have one already. So we don't technically use GitHub right now. We mirror the code there so that it's a friendly link for everyone to go look at. But we actually do all of our review and collaboration in a Gerrit instance. And then that's all mirrored back to GitHub. But the Gerrit instance uses GitHub authentication as the backend. So get a GitHub account. Clone a project from Gerrit. Make changes, test, commit. And then there's a link here. And I've got read and apply the rules. These are going to be things like coding style or best practices, et cetera. So it'd be good to have a look at those, know that they're there, so you can apply them to your patch. Then submit the patch, and I'm not going to talk about it because this is a really good step-by-step guide. The second link there on how to submit something to Gerrit from your laptop. Next, in the Gerrit GUI, add your peers to the list of people to review the code. Like, don't push a patch and then not ask anyone to review it. It's on the patch author to go identify some people to do a review, and it can be your peers. That's fine. And over time, as you come to know the community, you're going to find people will come review your code. You'll start to learn who is interested and who would probably want to review. You can start adding those people as well. But until you've developed that, just adding a couple of your peers is fine. And the last thing here is just, these communities sometimes have stigma that go with them in terms of it's painful. And I'm actually, I think I'm pretty proud of how, Am I out of time or? Yeah, I think we've actually done pretty well in this sense, maybe better than other projects that are out there. So, definitely ask for help, and there are people that want to help you. So don't be afraid to bring questions to the forums we talked about earlier, GitHub, the mailing list, IRC. The trick is, ask the question the first time, and that's fine. Where maybe you start to run in trouble, right, is if you're asking the same question over and over again, right? That's when people, but that first time, your questions, I expect that they'll be embraced, and it shouldn't be a negative experience. I wouldn't expect it to be a negative experience. All right, last one. Now this is submitting a patch for the Linux kernel. This gets its own special slide because the kernel is a big part of OpenBMC, and it has a different process for patch submission than all the rest of the code. You can include U-boot in here as well. It has the same process as Linux. The first thing to understand is that as a project, the long-term goal is to eliminate having a special OpenBMC process for submitting changes to the kernel, or even having a kernel fork at all. The intent is that at some point we will just develop in the Linux kernel community and bring those changes back into OpenBMC. Again, Git, important. The first step, subscribe to the mailing list. Clone the OpenBMC Linux fork, make your changes. There's a separate set of rules, best practices, etc. From the rest of the code. You can go, there's a link there. Apply the what's in there to your patch. There's lots of, one nice thing about kernel work is there are a lot of examples out there you can go look at. You can go look on kernel mailing lists. There's hundreds of them for examples, and get, kind of prepare yourself for the exchange that you're about to have in terms of going through the process of going through a code review. And the last bullet there is the actual mechanics of submitting your patch. And this consists of just sending an email to the mailing list. And that's really well described with that link, that last link there. So that is it. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions? We have a few minutes. Any questions? Nancy?
So the question was, oh, yeah. Okay, so the question was, there's a mailing list, and mailing lists have, open source project mailing lists have a concept of etiquette. And there was some discussion on the mailing list recently along these lines. So I guess what I'll say is be aware that there is such a thing as mailing list etiquette. We can, if people have ideas on how to make that learning process easier, I'd love to hear them, because I think a lot of us kind of went through a painful learning experience, finding those things out. So just one, try not to take it too personally if those kinds of things are pointed out to you. It's just kind of par for the course for an open source project. And again, this is one of those things where the first time you do it, somebody will politely say, hey, we have mailing list etiquette, can you do that? But then if you continually do it over and over again, that's when people start to get kind of cranky. So yeah, just be aware it's there. And then the other thing I'll say about it is there's actually a point to doing it, because in huge projects like Linux, let's say, or hopefully OpenBMC at some point, like the mailing list, it's a high volume thing. There's a lot of stuff going through there, and a lot of mailing list etiquette and guidelines are built around enabling people that participate on that list in that medium to quickly disseminate the information they need. So it's not completely arbitrary, like, oh, this is just what hackers like, and they like to see things this particular way. There actually is a point to it, and it can provide value. Good question, Nancy. Thanks.
All right, any more questions? All right, thanks, Brad. Next.